identification. This is tape D1, recorded by Harry Martin with Alex Lochhead on the 16th of November 1988 at Oakley in Victoria, and it begins in 10 seconds from now. Alex Lochhead, could we begin by you telling us where you were born and when you were born, and something about your childhood?
Well, I was born in Moonee Ponds in Victoria, one of a family of 3. Nothing startling about my childhood. I went to Essendon State School, then to Essendon High School, and then I worked for a flour milling firm.
Well, what year were you born?
I was born in 1922, December 1922.
What were the circumstances of your family then? Because we were moving into the Depression period and things could be rather grim. What was your circumstance?
Well, our circumstances was probably better than most. My father was a printing engineer, and we seemed to have a car, which a lot of people didn't. Not a very good one, but a car, and a house which we owned. Our circumstances were more than some of them at the time. And
what was your father doing?
He was a printing engineer.
Sorry, you mentioned that. Yeah. In terms of the relevant standards of living, how would you have seen yourself? Did you regard yourself as middle class or working class, or didn't you even think in those terms?
We didn't think in those terms, but I suppose it would be somewhere between working class and middle class, I would think.
As far as schooling was concerned, how far did you go?
I went only to the intermediate stage at high school, and I was offered a job at that time and accepted the job, and so I didn't bother going on to any further schooling.
Had you earlier had any particular sort of aspirations about what you were going to do with your life, or dreams of becoming a doctor or pilot or anything of that sort?
No, not at all. I think at those days you were happy to get a job of any description because they were very scarce, and I didn't have any aspirations at all, no.
What about the First World War in terms of the way it loomed as a part of fairly contemporary history? Had you members of the family had been involved in the war?
No, none of my family were involved in the war, but our neighbours were, and quite often talked about it, and we saw plenty of pictures of it, and it all looked very exciting at times, but as pictures show, they don't show the worst side of it.
Did the term Anzac mean anything in particular to you as a young person?
No, not really, because we had heard of the Anzac landing, but it wasn't given the prominence that it is now. It was just part of the Great, or what is called the Great War, and we had Anzac Day naturally, but the Anzac just wasn't talked about. I don't suppose people really understood what it was all about at that stage.
What about the way you saw yourselves? It was a period when many Australians saw themselves essentially as being British in many respects. Were you British Australian? How did you see your sense of identity?
Oh, we were Australians, although my father was Scotch and my mother was English. We really thought we were Australians as part of the British Empire.
Were you a religious family?
No, we did go to church, but I don't think you'd call us very religious, but church was part of the normal procedures where you went Sunday, you met your friends there. That was part of life in those days.
It was also part of life then often for employers to ask what your religion was.
Yes, my employees were a Methodist family and mainly employed Methodists, and you were always asked what religion. In fact, sometimes you had to have a reference from your minister to obtain a job.
Was it so that if you were, say, Catholic, that you might not have got the job simply on that grounds?
I didn't know then. I've heard later on that was so, yes.
What about politics? Was that a part of family life? Was your father particularly concerned?
No, we weren't a political family, and politics was something we didn't even talk about or discuss.
So from your memory, was there any tradition of voting for a particular party? Were you Labor or Liberal, or were swinging?
I would say swinging. We didn't know what father or mother voted for, and naturally we didn't vote in those days, so I don't really know.
When the war began in Europe, then, what do you recall of your own sense of the importance of the event, and then subsequently with Australia's entry into the war, when Mr. Menzies said, well, Britain's at war, so is Australia. Was that a moment of importance?
Well, it was a moment of importance to us, although my father, who'd lived through the First World War, saw it differently from what we did. He thought, well, another war, another doomsday, another lot of killing going on. I think a lot of the young people thought it was an opportunity to get away, and but the parents who'd been to the First World War saw it differently.
So you saw it in the light of providing an opportunity for adventure and getting away and so on, did you?
Basically, yes. And I think quite a number of people, because at that stage employment wasn't easy, a lot of unemployed, and people saw it as a chance of at least getting 3 meals a day.
So what was the process of joining up for you?
Oh, well, actually, I'd joined the a cadet corps when I was 16, and it was a natural transgression from the cadets into the militia, as it was called then, and from then they called for volunteers to go to New Guinea to form this garrison unit, and a large number of us volunteered to go in that.
Going back to the Cadet Corps, what was the nature of that in terms of its usefulness as some kind of introduction to military training and so on?
Well, I think it was handy because we became part of a unit. We learnt, well, I suppose Boy Scout skills. We learnt to handle weapons.
Did you actually fire the weapons?
Yes, we used to go to the range once a year and fire weapons. Not very many. I think it was 10 rounds per rifle. That was all we fired. But it was a part of comradeship and being with your mates and going away every one weekend, every 2 months, and you felt you were in the army anyhow, even though you're only a kid. But it was part of army life.
What about the people who were in charge of the cadets? Were they sort of militaristic in outlook and bearing and that sort of thing, or how do you recall them?
Well, they were normal militia officers who were posted for a short term to train the cadets. The cadet unit was part of the militia unit, and the unit I was with saw it as just another company, and officers were and sergeants were given a chance to train people, either a 1 year or 2 year posting into the Cadet Corps.
How did you see them? Were you at all in awe of them? Did you see them as officers, as military men in that sense, or as you got involved, start to see the ludicrous side of making people run around and jump to orders and that?
No. At those days, an officer was an officer, and a sergeant was a sergeant. You did what they ordered you to do, and as quickly as possible. I think the feeling those days as against the current days is totally different, very divorced. But officers were a bit aloof, sergeants were a bit aloof, and the private soldier or cadet, he was just there to do what he was told.
So how were cadets disciplined then in the cadets?
There was no discipline as such. We only met for 2 hours on a Monday night, and the only disciplinary measure for anyone who was very offbeat, he would be sacked. He would be told to leave the Cadet Corps.
Where did you go?
Where
did you go for camps and those sort of things?
We went to Mount Martha for our camps. There was a campsite there which the unit used to, I think it was an old farm area, and the unit used to go down there regularly.
And at what age then did you then move to the militia?
18. When you turned 18, it was an automatic transfer into the militia.
So how did you find the contrast in terms of the approach towards you as a young trainee, as it were, in terms of discipline and training, compared with your experience in the cadets?
There was no difference at all because at that time there were quite a number of us turned 18 and we all went in together, and actually there was no difference at all.
Well, as to the young men, it's a time when a lot of young fellows are starting to drink and try and discover a bit more about life. Was there a difference in the nature of the young men in the militia and those in cadets?
Oh, there was to an extent, but people didn't have the money to go drinking too hard in those days, and they didn't have cars to travel around, and at that stage when we moved in, things were looking a bit grim. People were more responsible, I think. People did drink, of course, but they couldn't drink to excess, as so many of them do now, because they didn't have the money to do it.
Do you recall your first introduction to the drink, as it were?
Not really, no. I think the first time I had a drink was in New Guinea.
What about most of your fellows then around that age? Were they also inclined to perhaps avoid it rather than feel that it was a necessary part of becoming a young man?
Oh yes, none of my mates drank at all, and I didn't feel any need to. They didn't chase drink. I don't think it was ever sort of thought of as a necessary part of becoming a man at all.
What about your family? You've said that they, or your father anyway, wasn't all that thrilled by the prospect of Australia being involved in another war. Were they concerned to see you in uniform, or with the thought that you could get dragged into it?
Yes, they weren't very happy at all, but they agreed that I could do what I wanted to do if I wanted to do it that way, and because my friends were there, they were quite not happy to see me in it, but they were prepared to go along with it.
What about the expectations then as to employment when you were leaving your job? Was the feeling at the time, well, when you finished and got through, you could go back and pick up the same job?
Yes, well, that's as part of the situation at that time. The employers had to give leave for camps, and at that time was a 3 months camp period. I think once every 2 years, but I'm not sure on that. But the employer had to give you leave and take you back, and if you signed on to go away during the war, the employer was forced to take you back at the when the war finished and you rejoined the firm.
How long then before you were posted to New Guinea? How long were you in training in the CMF? 9 months, 10 months. 10 months. How did you see that period of training in terms of an introduction to the reality of war? How useful was it?
Part of it was useful. The weapon training was useful. The camp routine was useful. Tactically, it was a waste of time because they were still running in the trench warfare of the 1418 war. So,
did that seem apparent at the time, or was it just accepted, well, this is what's got to be done, and everybody just simply went along with it?
Oh, well, that was an accepted part of it because no one had understood New Guinea or jungle fighting at all. There was more open fighting, the desert fighting, so therefore that was similar to France in the last war, and that was an accepted, that was the training at the time.
By then, it seems there were attitudes developed in the regular army towards the militia. The term chocos was used and so on. Do you recall how you were regarded?
See, that was not truly regular army because before the war there was virtually no regular army, just a nucleus of training cadres. The VX man who joined up to the AIF referred to the militia as chocos, but not until after some of them came back. There was two distinct groups. There was the AIF and there was the militia. One was VX, we could go overseas and fight. The militia couldn't. They had to stay in Australia. And that's where the difference became.
Did the term bother you at the time? Was it something that sort of stuck a bit, the notion that, you weren't fair dinkum soldiers?
No, not at all, no. It's I don't think it worried me. I think it may have worried some, but those who wanted to could join the AIF and get away from it. A lot were unable to or couldn't because of their employment. They're in reserved occupation, so they had to stay where they were. So some it bothered, others it didn't.
For a lot of young men, it seems the notion of going overseas as part of the attraction and adventure of being involved in the army meant essentially Europe, that Papua New Guinea certainly wouldn't have been seen as a particularly exotic or exciting place to go. How do you recall seeing the prospect of going there?
Well, we knew it was an island north of Australia. That was all we knew about it. At that time, of course, it was virtually unexplored. The only people up there were a few gold miners, copper plantations, and a few trading townships, which sort of supplied all the outlying islands. But we didn't really know very much about it at all.
Were you excited by the thought of actually travelling?
Yes, well, I couldn't go away over to the Middle East because of my age, and this was the only opportunity to go away and to see something.
So how did you find the train journey to Sydney before boarding ship and so on?
Oh,
did you go? You went by train?
We went by train from Darley to Sydney. It was our first experience in a long train journey, and it was all quite exciting, but very dull and very boring, actually. There was nothing to do. I think everyone was sort of keyed up, wondering what was going to happen and how we were going up there and what it was all about.
And in those days you had to change at Albury to get onto another train. That would have been sometime in the early hours of the morning, was it?
Oh, God. We left at... No, I'm not too sure, quite honest. I can't recall. No.
Well, what about arriving in Sydney? That, I suppose, would have been a matter of some moment if it were your first time out of the state.
Yes, it was. I suppose we were very interested, looking around, saying this is Sydney and what can you see from the train, and where the train was going to take us. And when eventually we reached the dockside, we saw the Aquitania, which was... our troop transport, and I think at the same time there was either the Queen Mary or one of the other big British ships in the harbour, and the harbour was and the bridge was something we'd sort of heard about and hadn't seen before, all quite exciting, but we didn't really have time to take it all in, because by the time you got off the train you were formed up and marched across and got yourself aboard at sort of confusion, rained, and you really didn't have time to have a good look. And we never went into Sydney, of course.
When you were leaving home or saying goodbye to your parents, was there a sense of particular anxiety that you're actually going out of the country?
Well, yes and no. The Japanese war had just started. The impact was unknown at the time, and New Guinea seemed to be too far away from Japan to have any bearing on where we were going. We were just supposed to be going as garrison troops, not fighting troops, and they were sorry to see us go, but I don't think they realised quite what was going to happen at all.
It seems on board the Aquitania that conditions could vary depending upon whether you were below waterline or up deck. Where did you find yourself?
Well, we found ourselves initially way below decks. I think it was on F deck, which was below waterline. But luckily we were given the job of air raid sentries on the top deck. So when we got there, we just took our bedding up there, and we spent the entire time on the top deck, except for going down for meals.
Do you remember going out through the heads and the period of departure from Australia?
Yes, it was. I think it was all a bit too much at times. You were busy looking everywhere and trying to see everything, and quite a bit didn't register. But it was quite exciting, and although during that time everyone was being shown where things were and where the mess decks were, where you were sleeping, and I think we were being shown where our air raid or air sort of submarine posts or whatever they call them were, and you were sort of looking at the escorts and whatever else was coming, and I think at times it was just got a bit too much to take it all in.
Was the notion of submarines about alarming?
Oh yes, we had heard there were submarines, and I think a lot of stories a lot of reports that came in. Some were exaggerated. Some were meant to keep us on our toes.
What sort of stories?
Oh, shipping had been sunk, but no one could say where. No one could say how many. That there were submarines in the water. You have to keep an eye out for them. We thought that was the Navy's job, really, because we had an escort naval craft with us, so we reckon that was more his job than ours.
Was there about it the sense that you were sort of being, in a way, shocked into the notion that now it's getting serious, it's no longer a game?
Oh, no, I don't think so. No, it was still part of the great adventure at that stage. Mm.
And the voyage up, were you one of those who got seasick or troubled by the journey?
No, in fact it was mostly calm the whole way up, as far as I can recall, and on a vessel like the Aquitania, which was something like 50,000 tonnes, it didn't roll very much.
And on arrival, it seems you were billeted on an airstrip without tents, without adequate supplies, no malaria tablets and so on. How did you find that part of the arrival?
That was the worst part of it. The Aquitania couldn't berth at the dock, and we had to be transported on the naval craft to the dock. And then we milled around, and they put some of our gear on a few trucks, and then we were told we had to march out to an airstrip. No one quite knew how far it was or where it was, but there's only one road going there, so we couldn't get lost. And as I recall it, we arrived there about dusk with what we stood up in, and were told this is it. Just lay down and have a sleep, and in the morning we'll sort things out. And when they tried to sort things out on the escort freighter, everything we wanted was at the bottom, everything we didn't want was at the top. So we spent, I would say, roughly near a fortnight before we got anything decent to live in, any picks and shovels to dig holes with, even for latrines and that sort of thing. And the food was not very palatable because we had nothing to cook with.
Did it begin to make you wonder about the nature of the army and its capacity to work efficiently as a fighting force?
Well, it raised a few eyebrows as to why couldn't they have done this thing properly, and then everyone used to blame the wharf labourers for putting it in the wrong way and not the army. So I think the poor old wharf, he's got more than their fair share of the blame in that stage. But I think we were there, and we saw that our own officers were in the same boat as we were, and so we couldn't blame them. And the people that were supposed to do it, like the staff, they were too far distance from us at all, so we probably never even thought of them.
How do you recall relations at that period between officers and men?
Oh, most of them were, well, in fact, all of them were quite friendly, and we'd had a period of training at Darley where they got to know us, and there wasn't the standoffishness, if you like to call it that there used to be in the old militia days. They were part of the team, and they used to dig holes, they used to sort of help with the work, and I suppose they were one of us.
How long then after you'd arrived in New Guinea before you were promoted from the bottom as a private, as it were?
I think about 3 months later it was, probably April 42, when there were a few vacancies because people had got sick and were gone back to Australia for schools and courses, and that they promoted a few of us to the honourable rank of Lance Corporal.
Were you keen for promotion? Was it something that you were anxious, or others were keen to get on, as it were?
Though, strange enough, all my life I've never been that keen on promotion, but I've always sort of gone up because someone said, oh, you're being promoted. I haven't tried to push myself to be promoted, but I think if you stop on long enough and don't get sick or hurt, it becomes automatic, although a lot of people don't want it and just outrightly refuse, but I felt it was part of army life that if the time came and they said you're due for promotion, well, you accepted it.
Well, as you then moved to become a section leader, I think was the first promotion, did you become concerned that there might be extra responsibilities that could separate you from your mates because you'd now have to tell them what to do?
No, at that level, your mates accept the fact that someone's got to tell them what to do, and they're quite happy for someone to tell them. And I think it's at the section level, you all live together, you sleep together, you eat together, and they're quite happy for one of them, as long as they know him, to become the section commander.
Well, if organisation in that early period was not all that good, did it sort of offer you insights into the system and cause you any sense of greater concern that not only you may not know exactly what ought to be done, but others further up didn't know much either?
Oh, I think that was accepted part of army life, that we had a couple of old 1914, 18 diggers. One was our sergeant major, the other was the quartermaster sergeant, who used to tell us stories about, don't believe what everyone says, and out of confusion something eventually happens, and that's part of normal army life. So I don't think we really thought about it much. It was just accepted that there had to be a bit of confusion, and that eventually something would happen.
What about when something did happen, the first aerial bombardment from the Japanese? Can you recall where you were?
Yes, I can recall I was at the dysentery hospital about the 3 Mile when the first plane came over at night time and dropped a couple of bombs on Murray Barracks, which was virtually across the other side of the hill from us. And it was, no one quite really realised what had happened. They heard a few bangs and what's going on. I heard a plane flying, and then you suddenly realised that, the Japanese could come down this far. But it was only some aircraft up there at night time which you couldn't see, and only a couple of bombs, so I don't think anyone was greatly perturbed.
As the raids continued, though, and became more intense, was there a change in mood?
Ah, yes. See, where we were on the aerodrome, part of our job was to improve the surface of the aerodrome and to build bays out of 44-gallon drums and fill them with earth and put scrim over to sort of have holding bays for aircraft which may come in the future. And the other part was unloading vessels that came into the harbour with our stores and supplies, so that you had sometimes alternate days at the harbour or at the airport, the 7 Mile drone. And as both those two places were the only two targets worthwhile, wherever you were, you could be on the receiving end of it, depending what the Japanese were going to do that day.
Unloading ships can be a relatively dangerous business, even for people who've been in that line of work for many years. Were there accidents?
No, strangely enough, there weren't. I think that we didn't work at a hard pace because at the bottom of a ship in Port Moresby Harbour it gets pretty warm, and the people who controlled the slings were experienced. We only used to fill the slings, so I don't remember anyone being hurt or an accident whilst unloading or loading.
Was there any resentment about being asked to do this sort of work in an area where it was probably thought, well, there was native labour? Why didn't the native labour get given this sort of job?
Well, no, the natives had disappeared at the night of the first raid. We didn't. They just disappeared into the bush. So therefore, there was. We thought that was part of our job actually, because we were the garrison battalion, and we thought that was part of our job.
To that point, had you had contact with local people, either native or some of the original settlers there?
Not a great deal, no. We met a few who were initially building the 7 Mile Drome, and they warned us, I think if I remember rightly, they warned us that you don't work, white men don't work in this heat, it'll kill you, if you do have to work, do it early in the morning or late at night, but never work in the middle of the day. And we weren't particularly impressed. They had a gang of natives with them who weren't working very hard and weren't being...
Identification, this is side 2 of tape D1, recorded by Harry Martin on the 16th of November with Alex Lochhead at Oakley, and begins in 10 seconds from now. You were saying that the native people weren't made to work particularly hard in that period before they went bush.
No. They had a few people working in the stores, and that was about all, I feel, that we knew of. The big village of Hanabada, where all the native people around Port Moresby lived, was out of bounds. We weren't allowed to go near there, and the only contact was seeing people walking up and down the street.
Were there any young Australians affected by the heat, dehydration or sunstroke or that sort of thing?
No, I don't remember them being affected that way. They mostly were affected by dysentery and diarrhoea and that type of disease, because the conditions of cooking and what have you are pretty primitive, and they hadn't been upgraded to what they are now, and we didn't get too many lessons on personal hygiene and hygiene like washing your dishes after you eat and that sort of thing. And at the same time, we had no mosquito nets, we had no drugs to combat malaria, and so that I don't remember anyone being taken by the sun, because the heat is not that strong, and we always had a reasonable amount of water to drink.
What about you? Were you affected? Did your health suffer at all?
Yes, I had diarrhoea and dysentery, and sort of a couple of turns of sort of malaria coming on, and that was about all though.
Was the diarrhoea a source of amusement for others who didn't have it, or were there so many had it that nobody thought it was particularly funny?
Well, it was a source of amusement for those that had it, but as soon as they got it themselves, they understood what it was all about. It was very, very bad at one particular time, and the authorities and our officers suddenly realised they'd have to do something about it, which they did, and which meant a bit of hygiene lectures and smartening up the cooks and the kitchen staff to wash things properly.
In the absence of a reasonable range of medications, were the bush remedies promoted by fellows that had some experience of old patent cures?
No, they weren't, because even if they had been, they wouldn't have had the supplies to deal with them, or the means of dealing with them.
So where were you then when you first heard that the Japanese had landed on in the north and were now begun to see as a threat?
Oh, we were in Port Moresby when the Japanese captured Rebel, which we thought was quite close to us anyhow, and from then on that's when the air raid started, and then weeks after that, we met survivors from Rebel who'd come through to Moresby, the people that had escaped, and we talked to them, and we heard a little bit more about what the Japanese do, and then it became sort of obvious that they were a threat, and then the next thing we knew was when they were, or before they landed, that was 6 months later, the idea was to build an airport up at the north end coast of New Guinea, and because between Port Moresby and Rebel was the ultimate range of most of the aircraft. Some of them came back with empty tanks, but so we were then, the 39th Battalion was the battalion that was going to send to guard the American engineers who were going to build this airstrip. And one company was sent over to walk the Kokoda Trail, and a few went up on a boat with the supplies to land them at Boona. And just before they arrived there, the Japanese landed at Gona and Sanananda and Boona.
So which way did you go? Where were you sent?
Well, once that was known, the rest of the battalion was hurried forward, and we marched over the Owen Stanley Range.
It was a very different position from having been sent as a garrison to suddenly find you're going to have to confront people about whom now you'd heard the most atrocious stories. Do you recall how you felt?
Yes. Oh, well, I think we felt as though we needed to do a lot more training, because we had done nothing except, as I say, load boats and shovel dirt into tins, and although we'd fired a few machine guns against the fighters on the airstrip, and apparently the authorities felt the same way, because they gave us an intense period of training for a few weeks prior to us moving over the Owen Stanleys. Mainly it was to get us fit again and show us a bit of section and tactical work as they understood it at that time. And it wasn't very much, but by that stage most of the people had a rough idea of what was going on, and we were lucky that most had been members of the militia and had done some training and some small arms work before they came up to us.
Compared with what you might think of as, say, combat-ready troops, how would you have described yourselves at that point?
Oh, most unready. We didn't think we were really combat troops at all, unless we had a great deal of training to ready ourselves.
And what about your marching then up into the higher country? How did you find that experience?
Very, very hard. It was a bit strange coming from Port Moresby, which is basically similar to, say, Puckapunyal area, and then finding ourselves in this jungle, as they called it, with marching all day going up and then marching the next day going down, and carrying your pack, and it was very, very tiring, and by the end of the day all you wanted to do was flop down.
What sort of weapon and ammunition did you have personally as you were going up?
I had a rifle, a 303 rifle. We carried a bandolier of 50 rounds. No, sorry, it was 300 rounds. And we had Lewis gun, which was the machine gun at the time. That was the old 1418 War Lewis gun. And that was about the limit of our weaponry.
Did you think even at that time that probably there were going to be reinforcements sort of got up there very quickly and that you'd be helped out, or by then did it seem that you were going to be suddenly overrun?
Well, we didn't realise or didn't know the extent of the Japanese landing. We didn't know whether it was a large one or a small one. I think the general feeling was that once we got over the Owen Stanleys, we could hold them and push them back into the sea. We were soundly disabused of that theory when the remnants of B Company who had met the Japanese came back through us as we got towards the other end, of the north end of the range.
Were those officers that had come and who had had some battle experience, were they concerned to try and in some way or other prepare you for the reality of what you were about to face?
Well, the officers, our own officers, had no battle experience. They were in the same position as we were. But the old 1418 World War, of which we had probably about a dozen, they were concerned, and they used to help us and instruct us and teach us how to do things as we went along. They were guides and mentors to us as we moved through, and gave us sort of a bit of drill on how to move, and how to space yourself, what to do when you stop, what you do when you move forward, how to scout and that type of thing, things we'd never seen, understood or had done.
One might suppose a lot of young men would have a sense of worry that, confronted with action, that they may not have it in them, that they might in fact be cowardly. Would young men talk about their expectations, or did people keep this aspect of their concerns pretty much to themselves?
I think most people kept it to themselves. They were unsure, as I was, of what would happen when you had your first action.
What was the greater fear, the thought of actually being killed or wounded, or the thought of being disgraced in front of your comrades?
Oh, I think whilst you're up there, the thought of being wounded and having to make your own way back or be captured, that was the greatest fear. I don't think the thought of disgracing yourself or appearing cowardly ever occurred to anyone, to be quite honest.
So where were you then when the very first contact was made?
Well, we were.
I mean, on the track itself.
I suppose we were about halfway across when the word came through.
How did it come through? Was there somebody just came on foot, running through, seeking to pass on the information, or?
No, there were the Angao blokes who were walking backwards and forwards on the track, and
Angao?
Australian New Guinea. What do they call it? Australian New Guinea. They were administrative arm, which assisted by controlling the native carriers and providing the nucleus of recruiting natives and running the supply route and that type of thing, as well as doing a bit of probing and forward scouting. And they were old New Guinea hands who knew the area and could find their way around New Guinea much better than we could.
So one of these people came through your lines?
One came back from Bromgana, passing through with a carrier line, and we got our first inkling of what was happening.
What did you understand was happening?
We weren't quite sure. We knew that contact had been made. By how many Japanese, no one quite, they didn't know. Some said quite a number, some said a few. What were they going to do? They weren't quite sure whether they were going to come down our way or were just controlling the coast to do what we were doing, build an airstrip there. It was all very vague. No one had quite an idea of what was going to happen. They'd landed, they'd made contact with us.
By then, did you feel that you now wanted to go ahead and get it over with, that introduction, or did you wish you could just get back down to Port Moresby?
Oh, no, I think we were just, I don't think you sort of wanted to go backwards or forwards. The idea was we were going forward and to make contact, so that was it. I don't think anyone wanted to go back to Port Moresby. We'd go forward and see what happened.
How long then before something happened for you?
It was probably close to 2 weeks when we reached Denaki, which is the northernmost point of the range. Then that led down into Kokoda and the flat country leading up to the coast. By that time, the Japanese had moved down and occupied Kokoda and had shown no signs of moving forward. And there was a bit of a lull while both sides, we got the whole of the battalion up and grouped together, which was incidentally the first time the battalion had been together since we'd left Dali. And the Japanese, I think, were having the same problems. They had to build up their units and sort of establish what they were going to do and how they were going to do it, and then our colonel, under instructions from higher up, decided that we would make the first move, and we would occupy Kokoda, which had an airstrip, so that we could have our supplies, ammunition and what have you landed. And the company I was in, A Company, we had to move by a route off the main track to Kokoda to capture that, whilst the rest of the battalion moved down the main track.
To that point, with 2 weeks from when the first contact had been made on the track, had you begun to become physically debilitated because of the nature of the terrain and supplies and so on?
We didn't think so. We thought we were getting a bit hardened to it. The first week marching over it was a bit hard, and then once we'd arrived at the other end, we did patrol down towards Kokoda and other areas, and we thought we were becoming a bit hardened to it.
How would a day go to that point as you're moving up the track? What time of the morning would you find yourself being got up to move on, and how would you have slept and so on?
Well, as far as sleeping goes, we just lay down with a half blanket or a ground sheet wrapped around us. We slept mainly because of tiredness, didn't sleep that well. I suppose we mainly dozed, but we were up by first light in the morning and had a quick breakfast of whatever might be there.
Had you been cold and wet during the night?
Oh yes, you were cold and you were wet most of the time because it rained around about 4 every afternoon, so you became wet, but you were wet with perspiration anyhow, and you were wet crossing the rivers. Didn't worry you too much. The cold of the night was one of the main worries. You were probably glad to get up in the morning to start moving.
And your breakfast, you began to say?
Breakfast was mainly probably a slice of bully beef and a biscuit. Perhaps there might have been a yam or something like that, but not very often.
How much pressure then was there with the moving on? I mean, were you moving or being pushed to move at a rapid pace, or? Well,
not really, because you were able to move at a rapid pace, but you were expected to keep moving. You started off, I suppose an hour after first light, say 7 o'clock in the morning, and you moved. You had your rests when you felt like it, but you kept moving right through, and it was generally toward the late at night by the time you got to the next village, which was your next stopping point.
Would you stop for lunch as such?
Probably for a limited time. Lunch became one of our breaks, our stops when we felt tired.
Well, what was it? Bully beef again?
Bully beef and biscuits, yeah, which you carried yourself.
Any tea?
Yes, there was tea. I don't remember us brewing a cup of tea while we moved. It was mainly drinking. We used to drink water and fill our water bottles in the rivers as we crossed them at the bottom of the hills.
And what about at night then? What time would you stop and have a meal then?
Well, as I say, we used to reach the next village by toward last light. The people who were at these villages would have a meal going, which was probably rice and bully mixed together, and again the biscuit and cup of tea, and when that finished, it was bedtime.
Were there posts being sent, people being sent out on the flanks to sort of guard against some sort of surprise infiltration or anything of that sort?
No, not at that stage, because as far as anyone knew, the Kokoda Trail was the only means of crossing the Owen Stanleys. That was hard enough as it was as a trail, and the thought of anyone coming down didn't even occur to them, I don't think.
Had you been getting, given that you were there 2 weeks, any mail coming up or communication at all?
No, there was no mail came through at all, and the communication was a SIG cable which ran from Port Moresby through to Dennehy. That was the official cable for the control of the battle.
And you would have by then seen wounded men and bodies being carried back down.
Yes, we'd seen the wounded come through, and well, that was sort of sorry to see it, but I don't think it sort of affected too many people in the way. Well, gee, I hope it's not me. I suppose that was the thought.
Was there anybody you knew?
No, not wounded. No, not directly. We sort of knew a few people, but they were members of another company, and so we only knew them by name, not as a direct person.
By the time then you got to the Kokoda airfield, had you heard shots at all? Had there been any sounds of what was ahead?
No, when we did our attack on Kokoda, we'd left early in the piece, and by the time we got there, we'd heard a few shots and a bit of a battle going up back from where we came from. We thought, oh, hello, they've struck something, but we were busy with our own little pigeon down at Kokoda, and when we got there, we found the place empty, apart from a couple of Japs who'd been left as guards. So we settled down there and took up a defensive position there, and the object was to wait until the aircraft supplied us, and the other companies came down and joined us. We spent the first night in peace. We knew there was a bit of a battle going on, but that had quietened down, and we had no communication between our headquarters at Deneke and ourselves, so we didn't know what was going on at all, really. Next morning we went out and patrolled up towards Deneke, and I think we did about an hour up towards Deneke and found nothing. We came back and occupied our defensive positions, and the Japanese must have followed us in. And quarter of an hour after we sort of occupied our own defensive positions, which were only behind rubber trees because we had no means of getting holes dug, they attacked us, and they kept on attacking us, and we kept on firing back at them. And
when you say attacked you, where were you actually yourself at the first moment when you realised that there was an attack?
Well, we were standing up. We saw figures moving down through the rubber plantation. We were in the rubber plantation, and we thought...
Had you seen a Japanese at all to that point, wounded or prisoner?
No, we had never seen them at all, and we just saw these vague figures moving through the rubber trees, and...
Did it shock you? I mean, can you recall?
Well, we thought, hello, this is our C company coming through, who was supposed to be the next company coming down to us, and then as they got a bit closer, I began to wonder and thought, well, you know, they're moving a bit funnily than C company would, and they had all these fronds in their helmets, and eventually someone said, oh, they're not C company, they're Japs. And I think we fired the first shot. Someone in one of the other sections fired it, and so we all went to ground then, and then they started to fire, and then from then on you didn't have time to think of what was good or what was bad. And
do you recall your first shot?
Yes, I think my first shot was at a helmet that poked around the bottom of a rubber tree with a frond of fern stuck in it, and I thought, hello, that's funny. That fern wasn't there before, and it shouldn't be there now. So I fired my first shot, and I heard a clunk, so I think I hit him. But
how far away?
I would say 50 yards or less.
And how did things develop from there?
Well, then initially they probed forward and found out that we were firing at them. Then there was a bit of a lull, and then they put a sort of an attack into us when they came through the trees, and we stopped that again, and I think during the afternoon they'd made 4 half-hearted attacks, so they didn't press too many of them at all, and then that night when darkness fell, we sort of we had a check up to see what had happened. I found my Bren gunner and his both the Bren gunner and his 2IC had been hit, but not seriously, and tried to send them back, but they wouldn't go because they had nowhere to go anyhow, and so we stopped together for the night.
How many of you were in this particular area where this action had started?
Well, my section was on the left of facing the enemy.
How many in the section?
And the section composed of 7 of us, myself and 6 others. And then in the middle there was another section, and on the right the further section. And all I can really tell you is what happened as far as my section there. Obviously we must have done some damage because they came down amongst us during the night, and as far as I can make out, it was only in my area that they came down. And
what part of the night was this?
Well, not having a watch, but I'd say it was about 10 o'clock or thereabouts, not before. The night was very dark, there's no moon at all, and
were you expecting this possibility?
Not really. We didn't realise that they would move in the dark. We didn't like doing it, and we didn't think they did, but we were dead wrong, because we could hear noises and shuffling, but because we were above the ground and didn't have any weapon pits, we couldn't throw a grenade. We couldn't move and ask or yell out to ask what was happening because we didn't want them to find us, and so it was just a matter of keeping quiet. And in the morning there were just 4 of us, and eventually the Japanese did another quick attack during the morning.
Well, what had happened to the others on that?
I was just going to say we didn't quite know. We called out and didn't get any word from it, and anyhow they made a quick attack, and so after that I thought I'd better go and have a look, so I crawled out and behind the trees, and I found 2 of them with their throats cut, and one bonneted and one with his throat cut. And during the course of the day we heard someone calling out from, we were on the edge of the plateau which ran down to a river, heard someone calling from down the bottom of this. He wouldn't give a name. We couldn't go and find out because every time we moved they shot at us. So we still don't know whether it was one of my section or whether it was a Japanese playing fun and games. And there was one more which we couldn't account for. They must have dragged his body away or thrown it over the side. So during the afternoon they started to throw their little mortar bombs at us. It was raining at the time, and none of them went off. They all started to fizz, and we had a suspicion it was a gas attack or something like that when we realised how stupid that was, because we didn't have any respirators at all. We realised they were duds anyhow after a time, and then later in the afternoon we heard the orders being given for which we assumed would be a big attack coming into us, because the Japanese had a chain of command by voice, and we could hear it go down the line and go back. And then just on dusk they put their full-scale attack in on us, and we held them till we'd run out of ammunition, and then we rushed back and collected ourselves, and then finished up marching across a bridge and walking back up to Denneky, which we arrived about 3 days later.
At that first night, with a small section like that, you would have got to know people very closely. Was it distressing to find them in that condition, or was the nature of the circumstance something that somehow you were able to just put it to one side?
Well, I think we thought it was terrible, but I think at the stage we were at, we had too many other things to worry about to give more than a passing glance and say, well, I'm terribly sorry, but we'll think about it later on, because we thought we might all finish up the same way, so that we couldn't really spare too much time for mourning, if you like to put it that way.
This experience of the Japanese coming in the night when you'd not expected them, did it change your perception as to how you saw the Japanese as fighters, or did you not really at that stage even have much sense as to what they were like?
Well, the propaganda that they'd given us, they all had little short blokes with bandy legs, buck teeth, and they all wore glasses and were short-sighted. They couldn't fire a rifle. We found that was entirely wrong. They may have been bit bandy and had buck teeth, but not many of them wore glasses, and they could certainly fire their rifles. And after we got away from Kokoda, we had to make our way back to Deneki. We struck a standing patrol, and this Jim Cowie, who was the ex-1418 bloke, he assisted us in shooting a couple of them, and as we went through, we found that they're over 6 foot tall and big, muscular, well-built boys. So much for the theory of the propagandists and the Japanese.
Vic Austin, in his book To Kokoda and Beyond, I think it's Jim Cowie that he refers to as showing an amazing amount of cool and reserve. How close were you to those situations where you saw him under fire?
Well, as I say, he when the Japanese did their final attack and we fell back, Jim Cowie was there and grouped us together as we came through, sent some off and said, you can stop here with me and we'll gather anyone we can together. And he was, luckily we had him. He was a captain, I think, in the First World War. He won an MC and had quite a good record, and he was our guide and mentor, who taught us a lot. And so he was very cool and calm, and then we...
What sort of things did he do that you say he was cool and calm?
Well, just with the way the situation was, it was completely dark. There was fire going on over there and over here, and there were people moving in, and he was calmly saying, "Who are you? Come here. Now where's someone else? Who are you? What are you doing?" Start moving down that track, organising things to help people get away.
And what about under fire?
We were under fire at the time. There were rounds going over our heads and that were around the place. So he was just quite calmly standing up and directing traffic.
Was it reassuring to?
Yes, very reassuring. It was comforting to have someone like that there and knowing he could do it.
Was there then, or even a little later, an opportunity for you to assess your own performance as somebody who'd been a section leader? Did you look back and think that you'd done well, or looking against the way of this Jim Cowie? Identification, this is tape D2, side 1, recorded by Harry Martin with Alex Lochhead on the 16th of November at Oakley in Victoria, and begins in 10 seconds from now. How did you feel you'd performed yourself as a section leader?
Well, I thought I'd performed reasonably well, but I thought I still had a lot to learn. And this was borne out as we moved away, and Jim Cowie again sort of advised us on how to set rear guards, how to move as we were moving away, established a routine for us and sort of kept us all together. So I knew I had a hell of a lot to learn.
There's a natural physical process where if somebody is going to do something that is either extremely strenuous or has the potential for danger, to want to relieve oneself, to have empty bowels and empty bladder and be in a position where you can function effectively. But of course you wouldn't necessarily have that opportunity. Did you find yourself caught in awkward moments in terms of you either having had food or just about to go and relieve yourself, or...?
Not really, no. As far as the food angle goes, we hadn't eaten that much at all, and that was no worries. If we wanted to relieve ourselves and have a pee, you just lay down, and because we couldn't move away from our position at all, you actually peed your pants. But then it didn't make any difference because you were wet, and it rained during the afternoon, so you were wet through it. There was no other way of relieving yourself.
As you moved down the track and were being pushed back then, if one wanted to relieve one's bowels, you might suppose there'd be a certain anxiety about going off into the bush. How did you cope with that function?
Oh, it was just a matter that you'd wait till we had to stop, and then you'd advise someone you were going into the scrub. We only went 5 yards. You didn't move very far off it at all, and then give a call when you came back.
Well, having then moved back with Jim Cowie, what developed then for you?
Well, we got back as we moved in to try and go to Deneki. Deneki was again attacked by the Japanese, and we moved down a side track to a place called Ishiraba, and there we became part of a defence perimeter, and whilst we were there, most of our company's function was to either patrol forward or establish standing patrols forward, whilst we were waiting for the Japanese to regroup and move down the trail again.
If you become aware of your own need to learn more, patrolling forward sounds like it must have been an occasion where you'd have some anxieties.
Yes, it's you weren't quite sure how far forward you could go, and we had always had a limit of an hour forward on the track, and then our standing patrol was based on that 1 hour forward, and by the time you met them, and you might go just a fraction forward of them, and it was all clear. It was a relief to get back.
Were there occasions, though, where there were snipers or ambushes as such?
No, the only occasion we struck was the time we were in the standing patrol, and at first light the Japanese attacked us. They obviously knew where the standing patrol was, or had discovered it the night before, and it waited till first light, and they put in a lot of fire at us, and we were lucky to get away, and in fact we all of us got away without any one being wounded, and I think we left the Bren gun behind, which we couldn't get hold of, but that was it.
How close had you physically yourself got to Japanese at that stage?
Oh, I suppose 30 or 40 yards.
Was there at all a moment when you found yourself thinking that I'm shooting at another human being, or did everything just sort of move from one event into another, and there wasn't time, or it just didn't occur, those sorts of reflections?
I don't think it occurred to us at all. It was he was Japanese, he was shooting at me, I'm shooting back to him. I don't think it really was a case of human being versus human being. It was a sort of Japanese-Australian.
Well, from there I gather the Japanese continued to push forward. Can one look at a sort of period of time and indicate how much time was actually spent fighting in action on a day-to-day basis?
Oh, but sometimes it wasn't a day-to-day basis. It may be a period of a week before anything happened, while the Japanese sort of regrouped themselves after a battle, and we sort of regrouped ourselves. Not that we were going forward, we had to go backwards, but at Ishiraba, for instance, once they did reach us after a period of about a week and attacked, for the companies up forward, it was a daily thing for something like 3 days. For us in the rear, nothing happened except we had to be on the alert and make sure that no one was coming round the flanks of the perimeter. And then when the Japanese finally broke through, the forward companies went out, and then the rear companies, or I say companies, there weren't that many of us, but we stopped there and held them off while everyone got away, and then moved out after them. So, might be 1 day, 2 days, then there'd be quite a break from it.
Did you get edgy during those periods as time went by after a couple of days and nothing had happened?
No, you knew what was happening at all. You knew that every day there was, sort of fire going over your head from somewhere or other, and so you knew that something was happening, but you were just waiting for it to happen.
By this stage, with the lack of adequate food and the extra tension involved with the action and the physical exhaustion, could you see other men and could you feel yourself going down as far as your health was concerned?
Well, you were feeling very tired, and you knew you were getting thin, and you wanted a new pair of boots and new shirt, sort of thing. But you knew that you didn't have much longer to go, but if you like, but before something, you had to have a break and a rest and get some decent food.
Had you become at all fatalistic by this time? Had you resigned yourself to the thought that perhaps you were going to get overrun, you wouldn't get out?
I thought, we always thought we'd get out one way or the other. I suppose you're a bit fatalistic that you didn't worry about anything at all, but we all knew that we would never be captured. We'd always get out or do something. How, we didn't know, but we didn't want to be captured. We'd go.
There were some men who described the experience of having encountered wounded Japanese and being told, well, that they were to finish them off. Had you had that experience of finding wounded Japanese or taken prisoners?
Not at that stage of the game, no. No.
How do you think did you have a sense as to how you should or would respond?
Oh, I think I would have shot them without any doubt at all, because I don't think I would have had any compunction about it. Yeah.
Had you been briefed as to what you should do as opposed to do?
No, there was no briefing. There was. I don't think there ever was or ever will be. Just on the individual himself.
The knowledge of the massacre at the Toll Plantation, did that sort of loom as something in people's minds that the Japanese had to be punished or hit back at and deserved what they got?
Well, I think deserved what they got would be correct. I don't think it was retribution or anything like that. I think everyone realised that if they were caught, that would happen to them, so therefore you don't get caught. But as for paying back or anything like that, no, I don't think that occurred to anyone. It was just part of the drill that if there was Japanese came in because you're ordered to keep him and because they wanted to interrogate him back further, all right, you're protected him. There weren't too many wounded that I saw initially of Japanese who were still alive.
How long were you then on the track then before the situation was relieved, where the reserves came in?
Relieved. Well, we finished, we were there something like 2 months, round figures, from the time we moved across to the time we came back.
Well, during that latter part, are there moments or occasions that still are there very strongly for you? Men talk of particular scenes or images sort of that they still see today. Do those things still exist for you?
Well, only 2 things exist for me, and that sort of thing was the withdrawal from Ishiaraba. My group was protecting a 3-inch mortar which they'd brought up and was ready to fire as the Japanese were moving across the ridge in front of us. And a group came by collecting some from the 2nd 14th. Come on, we've got to go up and do an attack. And that's where, I forget his name now, chap from the 2nd 14th won his VC by going through this attack. They always remember the mortar coming up and there was no base plate. So chap called Merritt, Captain Merritt, put it on a log and started a fire, and naturally enough it went through the log, and but the mortar was quite effective and made a lot of noise and gave us a bit of time to get out. And the second thing was at Ura Creek, when we were again, this Captain Merritt bloke was, and about 5 of us were on the enemy side of the creek, and there was a great big log which was a creek crossing. it wasn't easy to cross. The river was about 30 feet below us in a roaring torrent, and anyhow we were guarding the remnants of the 14th and 16th battalions as they withdrew, and as we were waiting we suddenly discovered the Japanese had set a machine gun up and were picking at the log itself. So Merritt said, "Come on, let's go," and we let the others go, and I was in front of him, he was behind me, and I thought I was moving very fast, but he was telling me to hurry up, and the Japanese machine gun was hitting the log beneath our feet, so normally we would have crossed it on hands and knees or sitting on it, but we just ran across the silly thing, and with him at my back saying hurry. But they're just two of the memories I can think of at the time.
With the problems of getting up supplies and equipment and so on, and the limited armaments you had available, was there then a sense that you'd been let down or even abandoned?
Well, we realised that we should have got supplies at Kakada, and that didn't happen, as we found out later on. They didn't see our flare going up, and then the weather closed down, so they couldn't bring the aircraft in, and we thought that at that stage they could have done a lot more for us, but well, we didn't starve, but we were, at times we would have liked something different. We never ran out of ammunition, really. Clothing was probably the worst thing, and we knew the casualties were being looked after, so we felt that something could have been done a little bit better.
Did you feel angry at the time?
No.
When was the point then when you realised that you were going to get out, that reserves and reinforcements were coming up?
Well, when we got to Eura Creek, that was the finishing point. We heard that the 2nd 27th were coming to take our place, and the next morning, and we'd meet them and hand over our automatic weapons to them to give them more firepower, and that was a sigh of relief, I suppose, yes.
How were you seen then by the reinforcements coming up? To that point there'd been this suggestion that the 39th, as we were saying before, weren't fair income soldiers. Was there a sense of change?
There was nothing at all like that. They were just asking questions, what's it like up there, and what do you do, how do you go about it, They didn't ask who we were. We had no identification, of course, and no, there's nothing at all like that.
Well, was there a point somewhere in this period on the Kokoda track where you became conscious of the sense that now you're a soldier, you're a part of that tradition?
Oh, I think we realised that after we'd sort of held Kokoda for a while, and then when the 2nd 14th joined us, we just became part of them, and we were the same. There was no difference. So I think at that stage we realised that we were as good as them, and there was no argument about it at all.
At the time of reinforcement, it seems some men were physically just about completely at the end of their tether. How were you? Do you recall how you felt at that point?
I was very tired, very hungry, very skinny, and was just going because it was different going back than coming forward. When you were a bit fit, but there you just kept putting one foot in front of the other. And when we got back, I think people just looked at us on the airstrip as we came down. We made it down to the airstrip, and you're skinny and you're thin, and which we were. But tired was mainly, I think, the biggest one. Just tired.
How well were you looked after when you got back then?
Oh, we were looked after reasonably well as you can be up there, and we were set up towards what they call Hombrong Bluff, and then we occupied defensive positions there, but it was a quiet defence, and it was mainly a recuperation period. We dug our holes in our own time, and we ate very well, and we rested very well, even though we were part of a defensive force, but at that stage there was not much danger.
You said that earlier when people you knew were wounded or killed, that then there hadn't been time to grieve or to mourn, that you went on with it. But during that part of the campaign, was there anybody that you were so close to that you were touched by and disturbed by?
There was one bloke, Vern Scattergood, who was in another section to me, and he was missing. We all knew he was killed, but he and I joined up together, and we'd been close friends right throughout, and his was one that touched me most of all, I think. And as far as we knew, he was always just posted missing. We knew he'd been killed, but there was no proof, nobody to prove it. But his was the one that touched me most.
When you got back then for rest and recreation, were some men overtaken then by feelings about what had happened to people they knew? That
No, I don't think so at all. I think it was accepted as, you thought of so-and-so, but there was no grief at all or sorrow. He was wounded. He's lucky he's going back to Australia, and he's wounded. He's be back in the unit in a couple of weeks. That was all. I don't recall anyone sort of being overcome by grief.
You weren't wounded on that part of the campaign?
No.
So, how long then before you found yourself then being moved up again?
Well, from then, that was early August. It was December, end of November, when we moved up emplaned and flew to a place called Saputa, which was near Gona. And we moved up to Gona and saw what had happened there, and all the bodies and of both sides were still there, and we thought that, shocking place to be. And then we attacked Gona Mission, and then after that,
When you say you attacked Gona Mission, what happened?
Well, as I was just going to say then, us and the 2nd, 14th and the 16th Brigade, 17th Brigade had surrounded, what am I talking about? 21st Brigade, the remnants of that, had surrounded it, and it was just a matter of going in to take it. The morning we were going to capture the place, news came through that my father had died. That was the first mail we'd had for weeks, and I think this was on the 9th of December, and he died in late November. And
how did that affect you?
Well, it sort of hit me at the thought of having to attack that and just hearing that news, and anyhow, our company commander suggested, well, you can go back to headquarters and rest there until we get this over with. But in the meantime, I'd apparently been posted at the headquarter company as for some reason or other, which I don't know, and so I never took part in the attack on Gona itself, luckily.
Why luckily? How devastating was that part of the action for the people you knew?
Yes, quite a number were killed and wounded. It was a dirty, stinking, smelling place. Even the Japanese wore respirators because the smell was so horrible. And after they had taken Gona and moved away from there, I was part of a party that went round collecting weapons and dog tags from any of our blokes that still had them on. And there were something like 720 bodies, ours and theirs, in various stages of break-up, and quite a horrible place, really.
There's a very particular odour about the nature of rotting flesh. Did it stay with you?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It stayed for days, it did, yes. It's something you never forget, anyhow, at all.
How long then were you engaged doing that?
Oh, I think we had 2 or 3 days. We moved through and got as many as we could. We had to identify our own and put a marker for the Graves unit to come up and collect them and take all the weapons out of the area.
At the stage just before you found that you didn't have to go into that particular action, after the respite, was there a sense at all of having to brace oneself again, or was it again just something that one moved into without?
Yeah, I think it was something you just moved into. It was right throughout. There was no bracing yourself at all. As I found out later on, when we were doing the Itapita Wee-Work campaign, mainly it was patrolling, and as you were patrolling you were moving forward. You're doing that virtually every second day, so that you had to brace yourself and say, well, or not think about it, which I think most of us did. You just put it out of your mind, saying, tomorrow I'm going to go out. The day after I'll have to go out.
Does your pet dog come to remind you about something you've forgotten to tell us, I think?
I'm going to put her out, I think. Probably wants to go outside. You closed your mind and didn't think about it.
When you went back then to headquarters, what sort of duties were you engaged in?
Oh, mostly it was a protective duty. We were with a party that guarded the 25-pounders, which had been attacked previously, and we had to establish a guard area around them. We guarded a number of prisoners which were taken, Japanese prisoners. We did a lot of protective sentry duty around a few of the outlying Japanese areas. We protected carrying parties which were taking food rations forward and bringing back wounded on their return trip. Various little duties like that.
One might suppose there'd be a natural, intense curiosity about the Japanese prisoners, or was there a sense that you'd had enough of them, the less you saw of them, the better?
Well, we took an interest and had a look at them first up, then once you'd seen them, that was it.
Was there any sense of communication?
No. Not between us at all. In fact, it was barred. You weren't supposed to talk to them, but there again, they couldn't talk English. We couldn't talk Japanese.
What was the nature of their confinement? What were the conditions under which they held?
Same as us. They just sat down until, if they were captured, they were brought in. Sometimes their hands were tied, but mainly they just sat there. And as I see it, most of them, if they were captured like that, accepted the fact once it happened to them. And then we didn't hold them for very long. We had to move them back to the headquarters, and where they had some interrogation, I presume. During
this period of respite for you, was there much at all in the way of either entertainment or means of diversion?
None whatsoever. At night time, you just finished dinner and went to sleep, or if you were guard duty, mainly, well, virtually every night there was some form of guard duty, so it was 2 hours on and 4 hours off. Your time between sunset and dusk was taken up by sleep or guard.
Did that system seem to make sense? Because the broken sleep can often somehow or other be less effective than allowing one to get a longer, straight stretch of sleep.
Well, I think it's something you got used to because that was the daily routine. That was accepted fact that at night time you did your guard duty, and so if you weren't doing it, someone had to, unless you were isolated and went right away from the area and had a break completely free from it, which you didn't get.
Had you had any contact with the Americans at this stage, you personally?
No, not at that stage. We had seen a few in New Guinea, in Port Moresby, but we had really no contact with them at all.
What about a sense as to how the war was going?
Well, the information we got was very little. I don't think Guinea Gold, which was the newspaper, had started to become functional, and I think it might have become functional toward the end of the show, but you got your daily sit reps and news which they gave us, and at that stage everything seemed to be against us. Everything was a defeat, and even though we'd started to move forward, there's still a long way to go, and the war seemed to be never ending.
The Kokoda campaign now is looked back at as being one of the more celebrated annals of Australian military history. But at that time, was there anybody conveyed to you the sense that you'd achieved something special?
No, it was never. Oh, well, except when we came out, like it was General Allen gave us an address, congratulated us, but I don't think it sank in at all. We didn't think we'd done anything special at that stage. No.
Was there still a feeling that the Japanese were going to sweep down to Australia?
Not from New Guinea, no. No, I think we realised that once they had not reached Moresby, if they'd got there, they could have gone on. If they hadn't got to Moresby, well, they weren't going to get to Australia.
How long then? Sorry.
No, sorry, it's all right.
How long then before you were then taken round to Wewak to get involved in that part of the campaign?
That was, we finished at Gona and that area, I think at end of January, early February 1943. We came back and again started to train because we thought we were going up to Wau and Salamoa. But instead we finished up coming back on the boat to the Tablelands, where we were given a nice quiet camp and a lot of rest and good food and to build us up, and we had home leave.
You went back to Australia?
We went back to Australia up to the Tablelands outside Cairns, the Atherton Tablelands, and from there we were given home leave.
Can you recall how you got back to home and when you first saw your family?
Yes, we took a long train trip from the Atherton Tablelands through Cairns, Brisbane, Sydney to Melbourne, which I think took something like 7 days and nights. We arrived at Spencer Street Station at night, and just on dark we were given a leave pass on Spencer Street Station, which was the first time the Army has done the right thing, and got on the local train and headed for home.
Well, what do you mean by that, the first time the Army had done the right thing?
Well, normally you'd go to a transit camp, which in case of Melbourne was you go to Royal Park, and there you'd wait until such time you go from your train to Royal Park, and there you'd wait until a leave pass was issued. Then you'd have to find your way from Royal Park either back to Melbourne to get a train, or depending where you lived. In this case we came by train and we landed at Spencer Street. Instead of heading anywhere else, they gave us our leave passes on the station.
Your family didn't know you were coming? No,
there was no way of contacting them. We could have phoned, but the queues for the phone were that long and the service wasn't what it is now, and so I think we'd written, but the letter didn't arrive in time, and they were quite surprised to see me home.
So you just arrived, was it night, knocked on the door?
I think I just arrived, walked up the street and knocked on the door and said, "Here I am."
But you'd lost your father by that time?
Yes, yeah.
What was the reaction of the family? Were people inclined then to suppress their feelings, or was it all a bit overwhelming?
Oh, not really. I think it was a normal reaction. They're happy to see us home, and
were you emotional?
No, I don't think anyone cried or anything like that. We hugged each other, and was just happy to be home.
And yet, what with the long trip down, I gather you didn't have much leave before you were sent back again?
No, we had, the official leave was a fortnight. Unfortunately I had a week, and I had contacted malaria and had to go to Heidelberg for a week. Then I came back and rejoined the unit. I think half a dozen of us, we rejoined the unit about a week later than the others, the main body who had gone back as a main body on the train.
Identification, this is side 2 of tape D2, recorded by Harry Martin with Alex Lochhead on the 16th of November, and it begins in 10 seconds. Did it seem unfair to get such a short amount of leave after such an intensive campaign, or again, did it just seem that's the way things were?
Oh, I think that was accepted. It was fortnight leave was quite enough.
Did you accept that?
Yeah, yes, I think that, because, you know, the way the situation was, it seemed as though we might be needed again. By the time you left the tablelands and came home, had your leave and came back, that was something like 5 to 6 weeks of time, and I think everyone was quite happy that they had a fortnight's leave.
Were you in civilian clothes, or did you have to get around in uniform?
You were supposed to get around in uniform.
Was there a sense of pride, or was it just a matter of indifference?
Oh, I think we were proud of our uniform, yes. Most times, yes.
Was there by then a sense of recognition of the role of the 39th when you got back?
No, at that stage, General MacArthur direction was that it was Allied forces. There were no units ever mentioned at all. It was just Allied forces did this, Allied forces did that. Although there were mostly Australians who were doing the actual ground fighting, MacArthur made sure that they were Allied forces, which inferred Americans.
Did you get to the pictures at all during your leave and see newsreels?
Yes, we saw the newsreels of the current events. We'd struck Damon Para, not that we knew him personally, but we'd seen him and we found out who he was, but he was just another photographer, and the other people up there were just I think only 2 news reporters anyhow for their short time, and we saw the newsreels of what was going on.
Did they seem to relate to the experience that you'd been involved with, or...?
Yes, yeah. At that stage, they were. I think they were showing a bit about the lay and wow show, and the countryside looked a bit familiar and sort of related to what we were doing.
Were you touched by it, to see Australian men in that position and you being back home?
Oh no, I think we said, well, it's nice to be watching them instead of being up there at all. But, I don't know. I don't think we were touched really. I think we knew they were up there, and so it was better them than us. What
about life in Australia? Did the nature of civilian life in Australia, I don't mean for you, just generally, did it seem different? Did Australia seem changed somehow by the experience?
Well, I don't know about Australia, but the main thing at that stage was that there were a lot of servicemen around. The pubs were only open for an hour at lunchtime and an hour at night time. Meals were very hard to get, if at all, in town. There weren't many clothes, and not that we noticed much, but there didn't seem to be as many on display. And I'm not too sure if food rationing had come in then or not, but I think the second leave I had, food rationing had come in, so obviously you had to have a coupon book to get whatever you want for certain things.
Were military police particularly conspicuous? Were you likely to be stopped in the street and asked for identification or that sort of thing?
No, not at all. They were there, but the only reason they stopped you was if you misbehaved.
Did you ever misbehave?
No. Oh, I did not to them though, but on my first leave after we came out of Heidelberg, everyone else had been sent to the convalescent depot in Ballarat, and 3 of us from the 39th were sent back to our units, and it was Friday afternoon. We were told to report to Royal Park on Saturday, and we were all keen Essendon supporters, so we said, well, blow it, we're going to see the football. We'll report back Monday morning, so we had a further weekend off, of which we all got a severe reprimand. And
who won the game?
I don't even know who was playing, actually, but we'd gone to the football.
Yes, you got a reprimand?
Got a severe reprimand, which didn't mean anything at all, and put on the train, as we would have been anyhow. But mostly the military police would only interfere in a drunken brawl or what have you, something like that. But you were free to walk around the street as long as you looked a little bit clean and tidy.
What about American servicemen on leave or staying in Australia? Did you run into any yourself?
Oh, we saw a few not so in Melbourne, but in Brisbane. We saw a few and talked to a few, and that was at that stage they were fairly new chums. They were quite interested in what was happening and what we were doing, and what it looked like in New Guinea, and they seemed quite ordinary people like ourselves.
How did you feel then about going back? Did you feel at all that, well, you'd done your bit and maybe you oughtn't?
Well, not really, because we had a good break. When we had leave, we went back and we found a couple of months later that the unit was disbanded, and for some reason or other we were a bit upset about that.
When you say a bit upset, how did you feel?
Well, we felt that we'd done a good job. There was no reason for it to be disbanded. I think really the fact was that they couldn't reinforce us, and they wanted to reinforce the AIF divisions. We were very low in numbers, so probably quite a sensible thing to do. And
but was it demoralising?
It was a bit, it was a bit demoralising when we first heard the news. Then when we heard we were going to the 2nd Battalion, we were a bit sort of proud that we were going to an old unit like that, and with a fine history, and then we started to wonder how we'd fit into the unit, and would they accept us, and eventually they accepted us, and we fit in.
When you say eventually, what about the first moment of arrival, when you were finding your feet, as it were?
Well, initially there was a bit of anti-us. We are the second.
How did that show?
It was just that they wouldn't talk to us, they wouldn't help us. Some of them, I'm not saying everyone, but a great number of them wouldn't talk to us, wouldn't help us, went out of the way to be objectionable, various little things. And
did it cause fights at all?
No, we never had a fight. I think most people said, well, they're not worth worrying about, we're not going to fight them at all, we'll just sort of ignore them. And but then after about a month or so, we suddenly discovered all these people who were anti-us had just joined the unit anyhow. They'd never seen any action, they were just recruits themselves. And the old-timers of the unit, to the old-timers, we were just another lot of recruits coming in, irrespective of who we were. And then...
Well, how would those new recruits then develop that sort of attitude? Where would it come from?
I think they thought they had been recruited to the 2nd Battalion, and they were part of it before we came there, and I think they were a bit jealous that we had seen the action and had come there, and they thought we might take over all the jobs, or be promoted before them, and I'm not quite sure. I think it was just one of those anti things that people who've got nothing much to do at night time can sit and talk amongst themselves and dream up, and but eventually after a few months it all evened itself out, and they accepted us, we accepted them, and we became part of the unit.
By this time you'd become a sergeant?
Yeah.
How did you find the nature again of the difference in the duties that you then had as a sergeant between those you'd had formerly?
The difference was there were just more of them, of a slightly different kind. There were more people to worry about. Instead of worrying about 7 or 8, I had to worry about 30, and at times I think the big thing was that no one told you what you had to do. You sort of were expected to know, and you learnt by your mistakes as to what happened. And initially I had it fairly easy because there were 2 of us doing the same job, and we shared responsibilities, and then afterwards I was by myself. But
did you ever have to put men on a charge? Did you have problems where fellows would resent you telling them what to do?
No, I never had that, because I'd known most of them all the time, and there are other ways of getting even than putting them on a charge.
Such as?
A bit of extra drill, or extra kitchen duties, or extra guard duties, or something like that. No, putting them on the charge didn't solve anything at all, but that didn't worry them the slightest. But if they did extra duties, that used to worry them.
How would they react to that?
They'd accept it. It's strange. Once they know what you're going to do it, they think they can get away with it, they'll do it. If they know you're going to do it, they just accept that and it's forgotten.
Was there at all a sense of being, in a way, the meat in the sandwich? You're the buffer between the officers who are often passing down orders that the men might not particularly like, and yet you're no longer quite one of the men as you had been previously.
Yeah, well, that is a slight difference. That whereas you used to live with them, now you had a separate tent with the sergeants. You was just that slight difference, and they'd talk with you, but you never got close to them as you used to be close to them. And most of the officers, I never had occasion to sort of be the buffer of the officer. If the officers I had were always pretty direct. If they wanted to say something good, bad, or indifferent, they said it, and that didn't worry them at all. So I never was the buffer in the respect that you meant, passing down a bad order or something bad.
Well, what about then going back into action as to your responsibilities?
There it was. We'd had a lot of training, and that helped. We had something like 12 months up in the tablelands training, and by that time you'd learnt a lot more about what you should be doing and how to do it. And then when we knew we were going back to New Guinea again, I think it was a sense of relief. We were fed up with just training. So I think everyone said, "Oh, well, thank God we're going up there. At least we're doing something useful."
Could you have imagined when you're at the end of your tether on the Kokoda track that you'd be looking forward to getting back into it?
Not really, no. I think at that stage we didn't realise what the difference between doing that and training and doing nothing really at all. So I think everyone felt, we know it's going to happen. I think we're better prepared for it. Let's get up and do it and get away from this internal training.
So when was your next action?
Well, the next time we landed up at Itapi in end of November, early December in 1944, and we had initial acclimatisation and sort of getting the feel of things and getting our stores and our stuff together, and it was probably early February by the time we started to move. Another brigade had gone ahead of us and moved down, and then our brigade took over somewhere in February, I think, and then it was on. We just kept moving down the coast.
When you say it was on, what happened? What was your first direct encounter again?
Well, the first direct encounter was patrolling, and most of the movement was a patrol work until you struck something. And first few days, or the first few patrols, we met nothing at all, and in fact we only had slight encounters until we got down to a place called Cape Moam, inland from there, and there we were patrolling a team of Japanese Marines. As we found later on, the track from inland to the coast was a major supply route for them and a means of communications, and with their inland force and the coast. And,
how was the nature of the terrain here compared with where you'd been before?
Initially it was coast and then low hills, a lot easier than the Owen Stanleys. They're only about 300 or 400 feet high, the low ranges of hills, but of which we had to move up and down at much easier movement. And so we met this bunch of Marines, and it took us about a week to clean them out from the area. In due course, Vic got...
What did cleaning them out involve? Were they dug into
They were dug in holes, and they were firing back at us, and we had to move forward and shell them and mortar them, and had aircraft strikes on them. And it was during one of those attacks that Vic Austin got wounded, and his boss got a VC, and So Vic's platoon did most of the dirty work, and I lost my platoon commander there, and in fact my company had 2 platoon commanders killed and out of 3, and one wounded. 2 sergeants badly wounded, and we lost a lot of casualties there. And then Vic and his mob did the dirty work, and then my platoon in the finish cleaned out the last little remnants of them, and we moved down and rejoined the company on the coast. And that was really the only time, or the second last time we struck anyone at all. And then we moved down to Wee-Wack, by which time another brigade had moved through us and cleaned out Wee-Wack. Was there I got promoted to lieutenant and got paid for what I was doing instead of half paid, and then we moved again inland to link up with the 17th Brigade, which had been moving inland, and again it was terrain very similar to the Owen Stanleys. You're in the higher hills, and I'd been at this stage transferred to another company, and my old company struck a lot of trouble, and a lot of my friends were killed, and we only struck one little thing. That was 2 days before the war on a patrol. I lost 2 killed and 1 wounded on 2 days before the end of the war.
Did you know the war was near end?
No, we had no idea at all. Actually, the only indication was on the day the war finished, I think it was, that morning we heard the drums up and down the Sepik, and we were just over the ridge from it, and the natives, carriers, said, war she finished, master. We said, ha ha ha, and they said, yes, that's right, and anyhow, that's just then they said, patrols are finished, go back to your area and keep a good lookout, because the Japanese might do something stupid. And later in the day we heard the war had finished.
How did you feel?
Well, at that stage relieved, but then again we were still forward and we didn't know what was going to happen, because we knew a lot of Japanese were caught between us and the 17th Brigade, and we weren't quite sure of what reaction they'd do. So for the next fortnight, whilst we sat there, it was quite a tense period.
Well, was there in fact any shooting?
No. Everyone acted. We could see them moving around outside our perimeter, and there was no contact made.
They didn't shoot at you?
They didn't shoot at us. We didn't shoot at them. But then we still had no official word of what was happening. We didn't, because I don't think our people knew what reaction initially they would happen, whether it be any banzais or death attacks or what have you. And in the next, after about a fortnight, we pulled out there and reassembled back on at Wee-Wack.
What was the most desperate thing that you saw Japanese do, or that you're aware of Japanese do in terms of how far they were prepared to go?
I think the only time was the early one morning when 2 Japanese came in just on first light, both with their hands like this above their head. They wouldn't listen to what we were saying. They halt, stop there, and next thing one went like that and threw a grenade, and which luckily didn't do any damage at all. And he and his mate took another grenade up and put them against their chests, one each, and blew themselves up. Their grenades worked, and luckily that's how some of them acted.
Well, with that level of commitment, about which you would have already heard previously anyway, when you talk of cleaning out the bunkers, you would obviously find yourself in a situation where there'd be a quiet, but you wouldn't be sure whether there was still somebody there prepared to do something to get you, or whether in fact they were all gone.
Oh, that's right. You never knew until you actually threw a grenade in or did something to make sure that bunker was open.
There's perhaps a difference between on a day-to-day basis thinking that you're going into an action where you may be killed or wounded, and another where there is a precise moment when you think this is it. Did you experience that sort of thing?
No, I think you always thought didn't think this was it. You always thought it wouldn't happen to you.
Was there ever a moment when you realised that somebody was pointing at you with a weapon and you could have been shot and he was either shot or you shot him or that close?
That last episode I was telling you about, the last patrol, we knew you get a sense of, I don't know whether it's smell or sixth sense or something like that, but I knew that I was going into an ambush. I could sense it, and there was nothing I could do about it because there was no way out. I had to keep going, and
well, why did you have to keep going if you were going into an ambush?
Well, the track we were on was on top of a knife ridge. Both sides were covered with a very thick cover of sugar cane, which was virtually impossible to get through. And it was only about 20 or 30 yards long, but it looked the ideal place for an ambush. And as I say, you get a feeling, and I knew I'd been lucky too long, and sure enough, as soon as we entered, there was my forward scout, myself, a second scout behind me, and the rest of the section hadn't moved, and they fired a machine gun. The first scout got hit. How I got missed, I haven't the faintest idea. The second bloke behind me was killed, and when I started to do something and put a bloke round to the left, there was a little Japanese sitting down there and he shot him. So after throwing a grenade and getting back as quickly as I could, I tried to get the artillery bloke to fire some rounds on it, and which he couldn't because they were engaged somewhere else, and we'd only gone a short distance from our battalion, and so I stopped there anyhow, and I knew I couldn't have gone anywhere at all till they fired the rounds, and the CO came up and said, "What's happening? Why don't you go forward?" So I told him, and he said, "That's not good enough." I said, "Well, you fire some rounds on that." I said, "Because I'm not going forward without them." And at that stage I was shaken, and so he called it off. He said, "Well, you go out tomorrow and do the same thing tomorrow." So that's okay. As long as I can get over today, I'll be right.
Did you have the feeling that he thought you were being cowardly?
No. I think he realised that after it had been a 6 months campaign, and that we were all getting the same way. And actually, we all had the same feeling. It was a bit useless what we were doing anyhow. We could have been doing something better somewhere else. His casualties were high enough. He wasn't prepared to risk any more. But he was our CO in the Owen Stanleys, and I'd known him quite a while, so I think he appreciated how I felt. And
did you feel that men that you knew were being needlessly thrown away at the stage?
At that stage we did, yes. We seemed to think that the campaign itself was not necessary. If we found someone, we shouldn't attack them, we just should blow them up with anything else rather than men. And we couldn't see why we were wasting good men, and most of the ones who were being killed were the old fellows, the long-serving type of fellow.
Some people seem to be haunted by these sorts of memories, these sorts of things. Does it get to you?
No, I don't. I don't get haunted by it. I don't think about it at all, but I think I've got the ability to switch off, which I learnt a long time ago, that each day was another day, and what went behind is forgotten about.
Have there ever been moments when you've had the impression perhaps there is something deeper that is there nonetheless?
No. I don't know. It's never come out, but no, I don't think so. I think what's gone by has gone by, and that's it.
Even if it was improbable that the men would mutiny under those circumstances, was there muttering? Would you talk about this and say, "Oh, look, we should pack it in and not continue"?
I think. Well, there was a slight mutiny, if you like to put it that way, when our food wasn't very good. The Americans had left us one barge to ferry our supplies up and down, and we were getting 2 meals a day, if you call them meals. We were getting worse fed than we were over the own Stanleys, and this was supposed to be, the end of the war, and or getting toward the end of the war, and a big campaign. And when we got to Wewak, Frank Ford, who was Minister for War, Minister for Defence, arrived on the plane, and he was going to review the troops and see how things were, and everyone knew what was going on. The officers tried to get a nice group of quiet people to go down to the aircraft to sort of represent the units, and if he wanted to talk to them. And as they opened the aircraft door, I believe I wasn't there.
Did you refuse to go or didn't want to go?
I wasn't asked to go at all. Not too sure where I was or what I was doing, but I didn't get asked to go. But those that went said as soon as he opened the door, there was a scream and a yell and abuse hurled at him, and about the food and the conditions, and so he listened for 5 minutes and to wait till it died down, which it didn't. He turned back and shut the door and took off again. So they got it out of their system. But
did it change anything?
Yeah, it did a little bit. Things improved a little bit from then on.
What seems to have been the problem? Why were supplies so poor?
I think basically our division was a reserve division for the landing at the Philippines for the Americans. Americans didn't want us anyhow, and when things went better than they thought in the Philippines, obviously we weren't wanted. Therefore, we had to do something to keep us occupied, because there was nowhere else for us to go. The Americans didn't want us to go anywhere to steal their thunder. But they didn't leave us any equipment. They had no landing craft because they claimed they wanted those to land in the Philippines. The supply aircraft were few because they controlled most of them, so they took all those off, and shipping was diverted to help them and not to us, so that basically we were the end of the line.
That could make men feel rather bitter.
They were, yeah. What
about you? Did you feel bitter about it?
I felt as annoyed as the fact that we'd missed out going to the Philippines and we're doing this, and I felt bitter to the extent that we were, all the old blokes, the long-serving blokes, were being killed and wounded, and but for really nothing. All you're doing was walking down the coast, and there was nothing to gain by it at all. The Japanese were short of supplies. They were living on sago and stuff, and they were dying anyhow, so we could have left them there, and it was a political, I suppose, exercise to gain control of the hearts and minds or something like that, but I don't think it worked that way.
Some men clearly feel that their officers were incompetent and they were badly led and let down by them. How do you see the officers?
In most cases they were very good. They did the job they were asked to do, and an odd case where an officer was a bit incompetent, but he really didn't last long. He was discovered and moved where he couldn't do any harm.
Was the level of incompetence what one might reasonably expect in the nature of a campaign, or was it to do with the lack of preparation, the lack of training and so on?
In a couple of cases it was lack of training, and some officers were very keen and eager and fit and wanting to get moving and do things. Others were inclined to be a bit lazy and let someone else do it and enjoy the good life while they could. But the majority were keen, dedicated officers who did a very good job. I don't think you could, apart from an isolated case or cases, you couldn't knock any of them at all. No.
identification. This is tape D3, recorded by Harry Martin with Alex Lochhead on the 17th of November 1988, recorded at Oakley, and begins in 10 seconds from now. Was there a worse moment as such for you in your wartime experience?
I think that last patrol was my worst moment, really.
You said before that as you went on, you learned more and you were better trained and so on. Were there some things that you did, or a particular thing that you did was especially clever, that you was an idea of inspiration that really worked very well?
No, I don't think so. I can't remember. I can't recall anything like that at all. Mostly it was just routine, and you applied what you had trained and learnt to a particular situation. So I really can't say there was any dramatic moment or flash of inspiration or something like that. No.
Well, when you came back to Australia, what was the sense of return? The war had finished. Was there a sense of anticlimax or relief, or?
Yeah, it was an anticlimax, I think, because we came back on the ship we loaded with all the rubbish, and that was in end of March when most people had returned, and we were just sort of someone coming in. There only a few of us came down on the boat. No one took any notice of us. I think we were a bit disappointed in that, really, but we came into Sydney, and they were quite happy to get rid of us as quickly as possible and shuttle us back to our hometowns, our home states. Then when I got back to Victoria, I wasn't too sure what I wanted to do, and the only posting that was available was up at Rushworth. I wanted to go up to Japan with the occupation forces, but they were full up. They'd been filled up quite some time ago, and whilst we were down in Milwaukee, and so I accepted up to the Rushworth concentration camps, and
how were the camps? Well,
they were quite good, quite comfortable, ringed with wire, but with huts in them, all the facilities.
These were Japanese civilians in the main?
Japanese civilians, but even the German camps were the same. They were quite comfortable and very cosy. I mean, they were unhappy over there because they thought they should have been sent back long ago too, and
So how long after the end of the war were the Germans kept there?
Oh, generally though, well, this was in when I left the camps in June '46. Basically, the last batches were being emptied out and shipped home. Then.
Did you get to meet any of them, talk to them at all?
Yes, we saw them at quite a few, and they were, as I say, cheesed off, browned off, wondering why they couldn't have been sent home before this. Most of them were Africa Corps, who thought they were superior, and we explained that they weren't quite superior because they'd been captured and we hadn't. And
sounds like there was an element of animosity still there.
Oh yes, they were. I think they were well-trained troops, and but they still didn't like being prisoners. They still didn't like Australians, and they thought it was shameful that they should have been kept there so long. They blamed the Australians for keeping them there, when actually it wasn't their fault. It was they just didn't have the shipping to do all these things.
Well, as a guard, so-called, at this camp, what were your duties?
Well, the duties were basically to check out every morning and night that the required number of people were there. If they wanted to go out, and we had an open camp policy for these Japanese. If they wanted to go out and walk in the paddocks or have them walk around the place, as long as they told the guard officer who they were, where they were going, what time they'd be back, that was okay. Over in the other camps, well, it's just a guard officer he had to check 3 times a day on a roll call. He had to supervise meals. He had to supervise the mounting of the guards themselves in their posts, and he was responsible for the making sure that if there were 200 people in his little area. At the start, when he left, there were still 200 people.
Did people abscond at all?
No, not there. There was nowhere for them to go.
What about the Germans? Seeing if they felt they were being...
Not to my knowledge. No, they were just waiting to go home and get back. Italians, they were quite happy. A few of those absconded, I believe, but we had none left there at all. The Germans were quite happy to go home. And they knew if they absconded, they might miss out on their chance of miss the boat.
How did the Japanese civilians, how were they seen by other army personnel or even local Australian civilians? Were they regarded with suspicion?
I believe so, early in the piece, yes.
But by that stage
at that stage, no. They were quite nice people, actually, because all of them had been born in Australia. A lot of them were mixed marriages, either married a Japanese one way or the other, and a lot of them couldn't understand why they were interned, and were a bit upset because they had been interned during the war. But no, they were friendly towards us, and we were friendly towards them, and there was no animosity at all.
How did you feel in looking at these people, though, who were related by race, as it were, with people who just before had been not only your deadly enemies, but had done dastardly things to men that you'd known?
Well, I wasn't very happy when I first went there. I was thinking along those lines, but when you got there and you met them and discovered that they were equally upset when they heard about it, and they considered themselves Australians anyhow because they were born here. They'd never been to Japan or back to Japan from the time they left. They considered themselves Australians too, and they were upset that they didn't believe what they heard. They said Japanese wouldn't do these sort of things. So I suppose none of them were military types at all. They were all civilians and businessmen.
You'd said that it was an anticlimax to come back to Australia, so there was no final triumphant march through the streets where you're recognised and given your due?
No, as far as I was concerned.
Did that cut? I mean, did it feel like you'd done something and never received an adequate acknowledgement?
No, I don't think so at all. I think we were happy to be home and go about and do what we wanted to do, and I think we knew that the war was finished. We'd missed out on the celebrations there. That was bad luck, so anything would be an anticlimax. We were home. That's what we set out to do, to come home in one piece, so there was no argument at all.
Well, what did you see yourself doing back in civilian life? What did you see your future in terms of employment and so on?
Well, I knew I could go back to where I worked previously, but I wasn't sure what to do. I would have liked to have got stopped on in the army because I liked the army life, but I knew there was no hope of that. So when I sat down, I thought, well, the only thing I know is what I did before. I'll go back there, which I did.
Did you continue full time at that? When you went back to the CMF, when you joined the CMF? Or?
Oh yes, CMF was only part time. That's sort of a part time.
Sorry, so you remained in the army until 48? I was in the army
until the end of 1946 when I was discharged, and then I became a civilian and started work a week or so later on. And
back with your old firm.
With my old firm, yes. And then it wasn't until about 2 years later that when the CMF or militia was reformed again that I decided to join up there.
Well, had the CMF did it begin to embrace some of the experience of the war, or was it back living with the methods that were employed in the militia?
All the COs of the CMF were World War II COs who'd been commanding battalions there. They were all experienced men. All the officers and practically all the sergeants were experienced personnel. So it was a totally different world from the previous old militia.
With the CMF at that time, was there a sense that it was now necessary to ensure that Australia was better prepared because there may be a possibility of hostilities, or was it a matter of finding a niche for people who enjoyed a particular type of career and for which there was still seemed some sort of use and need?
I think it was a bit of both. Everyone had realised that pre-war, when we had no serving or no regular army at all, we'd need a regular army, and we had a regular army basically with the occupation troops in Japan, and then again a nucleus back in Australia, but there was still the threat of Russia and all that sort of thing going on. That we had to have a nucleus of an armed force which would be ready much quicker than we had been last time. I think that was a feeling, and also that it was. I was going to say then, I think that the government wanted to have an armed force on a civilian basis, rehash the old militia into the CMF, or it was militia then. So it was a bit of one against the other, but the threat of war was still on with Korea and Russia and the Berlin show, and things weren't very peaceful at those days.